the future of genetically modified humans. In November 2018, a Chinese scientist named He Jiankui walked onto a stage in Hong Kong and announced he'd done something the entire scientific community had agreed never to do. He'd edited the genes of 2 human embryos and brought them to term. Twin girls named Lulu and Nana were born that month, the first genetically modified humans. The world erupted. He was condemned, arrested, sentenced to prison. But here's what nobody wants to admit. Those girls are now 6 years old, living somewhere in China, and we have absolutely no idea what's happening to them. Are they healthy? Are they developing normally? Do they have abilities other humans don't have? We crossed a line we can never uncross, and the experiments didn't stop. They went underground. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is editing human embryos. The technology exists, the knowledge exists, and the question isn't whether we'll genetically modify humans, it's how far we'll go before we realize we've created something we can't control. Let me show you how close we already are. CRISPR-Cas9, the gene editing technology that makes all of this possible, was only discovered in 2012. 12 years ago, we couldn't precisely edit genes. Now, scientists can edit genes with the precision of a word processor, cutting and pasting DNA sequences like you'd edit a document. The technology has advanced faster than our ability to think through the consequences. In 2023, the FDA approved the first CRISPR treatment for sickle cell disease in humans. Patients with this painful genetic disorder can now have their bone marrow cells extracted, edited to fix the genetic mutation, and reinserted. The results have been transformative. People who suffered their entire lives are now essentially cured. This is germline editing's less controversial sibling, somatic editing. You're only changing the patient's cells, not future generations. But here's the critical difference. When He Jiankui edited those embryos, he didn't just change Lulu and Nana, he changed every cell in their bodies, including their reproductive cells. When those girls have children, they'll pass on the edited genes. He didn't just modify 2 humans, he modified an entire potential bloodline, forever. That's the line we crossed, not treating disease in living people, but rewriting the human genome for all descendants. And the edit he made? He claimed he was making them resistant to HIV by disabling a gene called CCR5. Except we now know CCR5 isn't just about HIV resistance, it's involved in cognitive function, stroke recovery, and immune response. He may have protected them from one disease while making them vulnerable to others we don't even understand yet. Those girls are walking experiments, and we're waiting to see what happens. Now here's where this gets complicated in ways that should genuinely worry you. The technology to edit embryos exists, the knowledge of which genes to target is rapidly expanding, and the incentives to use it are enormous. Not just medical, but economic, social, and evolutionary. Right now, if you have enough money, you can sequence your entire genome for less than $1,000. You can find out which genetic diseases you carry, which medications you'll respond to, which conditions you're predisposed toward. Genetic testing companies have collected DNA data from millions of people, creating massive databases linking specific genes to specific traits. We're identifying genes associated with height, intelligence, athletic ability, disease resistance, even personality traits. In 2018, researchers identified over 1,200 genetic variants associated with educational attainment. In 2022, they found genetic markers that predict sporting ability. We're building a genetic catalog of what makes humans different from each other. Now imagine you're a prospective parent going through IVF. The clinic can already screen embryos for genetic diseases. That's standard practice. But what if they could also tell you which embryo has the genetic variants for higher intelligence, better athletic ability, lower disease risk, lower depression risk? You wouldn't be editing genes, just selecting from your own natural genetic lottery. It's called embryo selection, and it's already legal in many countries. The technology is called polygenic risk scoring, and it's improving rapidly. Within a decade, clinics might be able to predict complex traits with enough accuracy that parents feel compelled to use it. Would you choose the embryo with the best genes if you could? What if everyone else is doing it and your child will be competing against genetically selected children? What if not doing it seems like bad parenting? This is where we enter territory that science fiction has been warning us about for decades, except it's not fiction anymore. It's becoming a decision wealthy people will face within years, not generations. In 2021, a startup called Genomic Prediction began offering IVF patients the ability to screen embryos for genetic predisposition to low intelligence. They claim they're preventing intellectual disability, but the line between preventing disability and enhancing ability is disturbingly thin. They're not editing genes, they're selecting which natural embryos to implant based on genetic predictions. Other companies are racing to expand these capabilities. Some are developing algorithms that can predict physical appearance from DNA, eye color, hair color, facial features. Imagine selecting your child's appearance from a genetic catalog. It sounds absurd, but the technology to do it is advancing rapidly. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We're not going to get designer babies through dramatic CRISPR editing in some dystopian lab. We're going to get there through thousands of small, seemingly reasonable choices. Parents wanting to prevent disease. Parents wanting to give their children advantages. Clinics offering more sophisticated screening. Each step defensible in isolation, but collectively moving us toward a world where your genome determines your opportunities before you're even born. And it won't be evenly distributed. Genetic screening and IVF are expensive. The wealthy will have access to better genetic selection, potentially better outcomes for their children, while everyone else relies on natural genetic lottery. We could be creating biological inequality that reinforces economic inequality across generations. But let's talk about what happens when we stop screening and start editing, because that's coming too, whether we're ready or not. In 2020, researchers successfully edited human embryos to be resistant to HIV, Alzheimer's, and heart disease, all in the same embryo. The experiment was conducted in the lab. The embryos were destroyed after a few days, but the proof of concept exists. We can make multiple edits simultaneously. We can engineer resistance to multiple diseases at once. In 2023, scientists at the Francis Crick Institute in London demonstrated they could edit genes that control human brain development, making organoids, lab-grown brain tissue, develop differently. They didn't create full embryos, but they showed we can modify the genetic instructions for how human brains form. Think about what that means. We're approaching the capability to edit not just disease resistance, but fundamental aspects of human biology: brain development, lifespan, physical capabilities. We're not there yet. Brain development is staggeringly complex, involving thousands of genes with interactions we barely understand. But we're learning fast. The Chinese scientist who created Lulu and Nana was condemned partly because his work was reckless. He edited embryos without fully understanding the consequences. But give it another decade. Give it access to AI systems that can model genetic interactions. Give it better understanding of developmental biology. The recklessness decreases. The capability increases. Someone, somewhere, is going to try again. And next time, they might succeed in ways He Jiankui couldn't. Here's the scenario that keeps bioethicists awake at night. It's not one scientist going rogue, it's countries deciding genetic enhancement is a national security issue. Imagine a nation decides that having citizens with enhanced disease resistance, better cognitive function, and longer health spans is a strategic advantage. They begin a program of genetic modification, not forced but heavily incentivized. Free IVF with genetic screening, financial benefits for parents who choose enhancement, cultural messaging that positions it as patriotic. Within 2 generations, that country has a population with genuine biological advantages, better health outcomes, longer productive years, potentially enhanced cognitive abilities. They're not superhuman, just optimized humans. The rest of the world faces a choice: adopt similar programs or fall behind. This isn't hypothetical speculation. In 2019, U.S. intelligence agencies identified genetic enhancement as a potential national security concern. China has invested heavily in genetics research and has more relaxed regulations around embryo research than most Western countries. The pieces are already in position. Or consider a different scenario: wealthy individuals and families creating genetic advantages for their lineages. Think of it like inherited wealth, but biological. A family that can afford cutting-edge genetic modification gives their children disease resistance, longevity genes, enhanced cognition. Those children have advantages their entire lives, pass those advantages to their children, and so on. Over generations, you get biological aristocracy, genetic differences that correlate with social class. This is the stuff dystopian novels are made of, except we're walking into it with our eyes open, making rational, individual choices that collectively create outcomes nobody actually wants. Now let me tell you about something even stranger that's happening. Something that suggests the future might be weirder than anyone's predicting. In 2021, researchers created synthetic embryos without sperm or egg, entirely from stem cells. These weren't viable embryos that could develop into babies, but they were close enough to raise disturbing questions. If we can create embryos from stem cells, we bypass traditional reproduction entirely. You could, in theory, create a child from your own cells without a partner. In 2022, Japanese scientists used cells from 2 male mice to create eggs, which they fertilized and implanted, resulting in live births. 2 biological fathers, no mother. The technology doesn't work in humans yet. Mammals are more complex, but the principle is proven. We're approaching a future where reproduction might be optional, where genetic contributions can come from anywhere, where the traditional biology of sex and reproduction becomes obsolete. You could have children without pregnancy. You could have children with multiple genetic parents, taking genes from several people. You could have children who are genetically yourself, but edited for desired traits. The implications spiral outward into territories we have no frameworks for understanding. What does parenthood mean? What does biological relationship mean? What does human reproduction mean when it's entirely done in labs with precise genetic control? Here's what nobody's talking about, but everyone should be. The people making these decisions aren't the ones who will live with the consequences. Politicians, scientists, and bioethicists debating genetic modification are mostly older adults who'll be dead before we see the full ramifications. The generation that decides whether to embrace genetic modification won't be the generation that lives in a world full of genetically modified humans. But you might be. Anyone under 30 right now will likely see a world where genetically modified humans are common. Anyone under 20 might have to decide whether to genetically modify their own children. Anyone being born now will grow up in a world where some of their peers have edited genomes and they don't. The question isn't abstract, it's personal. Would you edit your child's genes to prevent disease? Probably yes, most people would. Would you edit for height, eye color, intelligence, athletic ability? Where's your line? And more importantly, where's society's line? Because we're going to have to draw one. We're going to have to collectively decide what's acceptable modification and what crosses into dangerous territory. And we're going to have to enforce it globally, which means international cooperation on a scale we've rarely achieved. Let me give you the optimistic scenario, because it's not all dystopian nightmares. Genetic modification could eliminate horrible genetic diseases. No more Huntington's, no more cystic fibrosis, no more sickle cell. Children who would have suffered their entire lives could be born healthy. That's not playing God, that's medicine. We could extend human health span, not just making people live longer, but keeping them healthy longer. Imagine staying physically and mentally vital into your 90s or beyond. That's not creating superhumans, it's preventing the decay that comes with aging. We could increase disease resistance. Imagine populations resistant to pandemics, to cancer, to heart disease. The human suffering that could be prevented is immense. The technology could be democratized. It could become cheap enough that everyone has access, not just the wealthy. We could edit genes in living adults, not just embryos, making treatments available to existing people, not just future generations. This could be humanity's next great leap forward, not through millions of years of evolution, but through deliberate, careful, ethical enhancement. We could become healthier, live longer, suffer less. All the things medicine has always aimed for, but at a genetic level. That's possible. It's genuinely possible. But here's the final uncomfortable truth. We're terrible at managing powerful technologies carefully and ethically. We created nuclear weapons and immediately used them. We created social media to connect people and created mental health crises and political polarization. We created fossil fuel technology and drove ourselves toward climate catastrophe. Every transformative technology follows the same pattern. We develop it faster than we develop wisdom about how to use it. We deploy it based on narrow interests, corporate profit, national advantage, individual desire, without considering systemic consequences. By the time we realize the problems, the technology is entrenched and the problems are very hard to fix. Genetic modification of humans will follow this pattern unless we make deliberate, collective choices to prevent it. And we have maybe a decade to make those choices before the technology becomes too widespread, too accessible, and too commercially valuable to control. The future of genetically modified humans isn't being decided in labs. It's being decided right now through regulatory choices, funding priorities, and public conversations. Whether we get the optimistic scenario or the dystopian one depends on choices being made this decade. And the most important choice is this: will we treat genetic modification as a medical technology to prevent suffering or as an enhancement technology to create advantages? Will we allow it to increase inequality or will we ensure equal access? Will we modify humans carefully and conservatively, or will we race toward radical changes without understanding consequences? Those girls born in 2018, Lulu and Nana, they're the beginning. The question is, what comes next? Because something is coming next. The technology exists. The knowledge is expanding. The incentives are enormous. The future of genetically modified humans isn't a possibility, it's an inevitability. The only question is what that future looks like, and we're running out of time to decide.